Right now, over 500 Melbourne apartment towers are structurally defective, financially trapped, and quietly falling apart. 65% of all Melbourne apartments contain defects, over a third of recent unit resales lost money, and ordinary Australians who did everything right are receiving special levy notices for tens of thousands of dollars with absolutely no warning. Stay with me to the very end, because after we expose every layer of this crisis, I'm going to show you exactly what you should buy instead. Picture the moment you signed the contract. Maybe it was a two-bedroom off the plan in South Bank with floor-to-ceiling glass and a rooftop pool. Maybe it was a one-bedroom in Docklands, a smart little investment property you planned to hold for 10 years. Maybe it was a cozy unit in South Yarra that the agent called a hidden gem. You paid the deposit. You sat through the settlement process. You handed over $500,000, $600,000, maybe more. And you felt genuinely proud. You had done it. You owned property in Melbourne. But here is the part the developer, the real estate agent, the strata manager, and even the building inspector quietly hoped you would never find out. The apartment you bought may be sitting on a foundation of rotting timber and unattached roofing. The cladding wrapped around your building may ignite like a candle in a fire scenario. The balcony you sip your morning coffee on may have already been flagged with a structural defect. And somewhere in a manila envelope sitting in an owner's corporation office, there is a special levy notice being prepared that could demand $90,000 from your bank account with less than 6 weeks to pay. This is not a scare story. This is the documented, peer-reviewed, government-confirmed reality of Melbourne's apartment market right now. The crisis has its roots in a very specific moment in Australian history. From roughly 2009 onwards, Melbourne went on an apartment construction binge unlike anything the city had ever seen. A flood of international capital, relaxed planning laws, government incentives for density, and a generation of young Australians priced out of houses created the perfect conditions for a developer gold rush. Cranes appeared on every central business district skyline. Off-the-plan sales rooms were packed, and every single week another tower was approved. Another building certificate was stamped, another project was handed over to excited new owners. But the regulator that was signing off on hundreds of buildings throughout the 2000s and 2010s was fundamentally, catastrophically broken. A review of the Victorian Building Authority confirmed that just 13% of buildings had been maintained and complied with the relevant regulations. 13%. That means 87% of buildings that received a regulatory tick of approval were not being fully checked against the standards that tick was supposed to represent. A Deakin and Griffith University study confirmed the devastating result of that failure. 74% of apartment buildings built between 2008 and 2017 in Victoria contained defects. Not 5%, not 20%. 74%. Equity Economics Research, commissioned by the Construction, Forestry, Maritime, Mining and Energy Union, found 3,461 apartment buildings built in the last decade contained defects or non-compliant combustible cladding. The total remediation cost, $6.2 billion, up to $165,000 per individual dwelling, and right now, tens of thousands of apartment owners across more than 500 Melbourne buildings are caught in a structural trap with no way out. They cannot sell because their building has defects, a pending special levy, or both. They cannot walk away because they have a mortgage, and they cannot hold on much longer because the bills keep arriving. Let us pull back the curtain on exactly how this system works and why Melbourne's apartment towers are falling apart right in front of us. Issue number 1, the combustible cladding time bomb. On the night of November 24, 2014, a single cigarette butt changed the course of Melbourne's property market forever. A resident of the Lacrosse apartment building in Docklands tossed a cigarette onto a balcony. The embers caught the cladding panels wrapping the outside of the building, and within seconds, the fire raced upwards, climbing 13 stories in minutes. Damage exceeded $5.7 million. By extraordinary luck, nobody died. But the investigation that followed revealed something far more alarming than one building fire. The Lacrosse building had been wrapped in alucobest cladding, a product specifically non-compliant with Australian fire safety standards. That was also covering hundreds of other buildings across Melbourne and the rest of Australia. Engineers began inspecting other towers. The results were catastrophic. Building after building was found to be clad in polyethylene-filled aluminium composite panels that could not comply with the combustibility criteria required by Australian standards. The Victorian government established Cladding Safety Victoria and committed $600 million to a remediation program. By July 2023, 365 buildings in Victoria had been approved for rectification funding, with works completed on 250. That sounds significant. But here is where things get deeply uncomfortable. The Victorian government's own research, published by Cladding Safety Victoria, confirmed that of the 359 buildings funded under the cladding program, nearly 50% had additional non-cladding defects on top of the cladding. When they started pulling back the cladding panels to replace them, they found what was hiding underneath: rotting framing in load-bearing columns, black mold spreading through structural timbers, water ingress so severe it had already caused moisture-related structural damage. Of those buildings with non-cladding defects, nearly 80% had water or moisture-related structural damage. Here is the critical part that will shock you. The government's $600 million cladding program covers the cladding removal. It does not cover what they find underneath. Every single one of those additional defects falls directly to the owners. In April 2026, the Victorian Parliament debated the Cladding Safety Victoria Repeal Bill 2026, seeking to formally wind up Cladding Safety Victoria as a standalone agency and transfer remaining responsibilities to the broader building regulator. That is the state government declaring the cladding chapter closed. But for thousands of owners still waiting for remediation, and thousands more who have just discovered what the cladding was hiding, the nightmare is far from over. The glossy, off-the-plan brochure from 2012 promised a premium residential tower built to Australian standards in one of Melbourne's most exciting new precincts. But the engineering report from 2025 reveals a building wrapped in combustible cladding with hidden structural decay, mold, and water damage, now costing owners hundreds of thousands of dollars each to remediate. And if combustible cladding sounds serious, number 2 reveals a building that was never safe for a single day of its existence. Issue number 2. South Yarra Square, never fit for purpose. South Yarra Square at 100 Commercial Road is the single most alarming case study in Melbourne's apartment defect crisis. It is the building that every aspiring Melbourne apartment buyer needs to understand before they sign anything. 46 apartment owners at South Yarra Square are currently staring down a $25 million repair bill. That is equal to approximately 65% of each property's individual value. If your apartment is worth $600,000, your share of the repair bill could be $390,000, on top of the purchase price you already paid, on top of the mortgage you already carry. But what exactly is wrong with this building? The forensic investigation reports are extraordinary in their findings. Load-bearing columns installed without proper footings. Commentators specifically noted the similarity to the catastrophic 2021 Surfside condominium collapse in Miami, where column failures led to a 12-story tower pancaking to the ground, killing 98 people. A car park entrance ramp missing its structural steel entirely, a roof that is not physically attached to the building, combustible polystyrene panels used in balconies, soffits, and as structural formwork, making up approximately 25% of the total above-ground construction. Basement drainage that is 80% defective, faulty fire systems and failed stormwater drainage. The independent engineers classified the building as never fit for purpose. Not substandard, not partially defective, never fit for purpose from the day it was built. Construction at South Yarra Square ran from 1989 to 1995, during a period of aggressive deregulation and political pressure on councils to reduce red tape for developers. Critics point out that today's policy environment has significant parallels, with new height limits approved across 25 Melbourne activity centres in March 2026, amid ongoing concerns about build quality oversight. The residents are so desperate for acknowledgement that they have built a dedicated online community called South Yarra Square, purely to document what is happening to them. They have approached the state government and the council for assistance. Both have declined responsibility. The builder that constructed the defective building is no longer liable under the statute of limitations. And so 46 ordinary Melbourne families are left holding a $25 million bill for a building that engineers say should never have been occupied. The original sales campaign promised contemporary inner-city living in sought-after South Yarra, a smart long-term investment. But the engineering report 30 years later says load-bearing columns with no footings, a detached roof, and combustible polystyrene throughout. Never fit for purpose. Because if you think the worst of this crisis happened to old buildings, number 3 reveals that brand new apartments are generating the exact same level of financial devastation. Issue number 3. The special levy ambush. This is the part of Melbourne's apartment crisis that is destroying people financially without a single structural defect being visible to the naked eye. Imagine settling on your apartment, moving in, unpacking your furniture, feeling genuinely excited about your purchase. And then, weeks later, a letter arrives from the Owners Corporation. It does not say congratulations. It says you owe $20,000, $50,000, or $90,000, and you have 6 weeks to pay it. This is the special levy, and it is completely legal. Under Victorian Owners Corporation law, if a building requires major remediation or repair works, and the sinking fund does not have sufficient money to cover it, the Owners Corporation can issue a special levy to all owners. There is no legal obligation to disclose a pending special levy in a standard property vendor statement. A building can be under active investigation for defects. Engineers can have already visited. The Owners Corporation Committee can know exactly what the bill is going to be, and the person buying the apartment next door may have no idea whatsoever. Real Australians living this nightmare right now include an owner identified in reporting as Jake, who was hit with a special levy bill so significant that he took a second job paying $10,000 a month just to keep up with the payments. And Phil Gallagher, who purchased a Darwin apartment 15 years ago, received a $52,000 defect levy notice as a retiree and had to drain his superannuation to pay it. On the Australian Finance online forum, one owner posted publicly that their strata issued a special levy of approximately $90,000 per apartment to fund combustible cladding replacement, on top of their existing strata fees of $1,200 per quarter. The Guardian reported in April 2024 that buyers were being completely blindsided by special levies on strata properties, with new owners discovering major bills days or weeks after settlement. What does this actually mean for every single person thinking about buying a Melbourne apartment right now? It means the purchase price is not the full cost of the transaction. The due diligence framework that every conveyancer and property lawyer tells you to rely on does not protect you from a special levy that was technically not yet issued at the time of settlement. The glossy settlement pack promises a sound, well-managed building with transparent owners' corporation records, but the letter that arrives 6 weeks later says, $90,000 is due and payable within 6 weeks, or legal action will be commenced. And if you think the people supposed to be managing these buildings are protecting your interests, number 4 reveals they may have been quietly profiting from you for years. Issue number 4. The Strata Insurance Kickback Scandal. Australian Broadcasting Corporation Four Corners conducted one of the most explosive investigations in Australian consumer affairs history when it exposed the strata management industry. The findings were so alarming that the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission Chair commented directly on them. Here is exactly what was happening. Your strata manager is responsible for arranging the building insurance on your apartment block. But in many cases, Australian strata managers were receiving undisclosed commissions from insurance brokers and underwriters in exchange for placing your building's insurance policy with specific providers. Not the cheapest provider, not the best value provider, the provider that paid the highest commission to the strata manager. Australian apartment advocacy surveys found that the majority of apartment owners were completely unaware that their strata managers were receiving these kickbacks. And because building insurance premiums have increased dramatically in recent years, particularly in Queensland and Victoria, due to weather event risk and building defects, those commissions have been growing larger simultaneously. What does this mean for a Docklands apartment owner right now? One detailed cost breakdown by Forge Property showed a Docklands apartment is currently negatively geared by $28,000 per year once you stack the land tax, owner's corporation fees, management fees, and inflated insurance premiums. $28,000 a year, out of pocket, on a property that is simultaneously declining in value. And the New South Wales Productivity Commission has now formally recommended banning strata manager insurance commissions entirely. That recommendation being made in 2026 tells you everything you need to know about how long this practice has been running unchecked. The Strata Management Agreement promises professional, transparent management of your building and owners' corporation funds. But the Four Corners investigation revealed undisclosed insurance commissions quietly redirecting your levy money into strata management firm revenue while your premiums stayed high. Because the next issue confirms that you cannot even trust the rising or falling numbers in your real estate app to tell you what your apartment is really worth. Issue number 5, the negative equity trap, the numbers that destroy dreams. Let us talk about what is happening to Melbourne apartment prices right now, because the data is genuinely extraordinary. In the third quarter of 2025, the City of Melbourne local government area recorded a 45.5% loss-making property sale rate. Nearly half of all property sold in the City of Melbourne last year sold for less than the seller paid for it. That is 9 times the national average loss rate of 5%. The individual suburb figures are equally alarming. South Yarra recorded a 41.9% loss-making sale rate, with average losses of $48,000 to $55,000 per transaction. Prahran came in at 34.9%, Stonington at 29.8%, Port Phillip at 26.3%, Windsor at 25%. And who is carrying the weight of these losses? Unit sellers represented 68.9% of all national property losses, despite apartments being only 1/3 of total resales. Melbourne apartment owners are carrying an extraordinary disproportionate share of the nation's property losses. 8,000 completed apartments are currently sitting unsold across Melbourne, representing 17% of all apartments constructed between 2020 and 2024. One-bedroom units are down 2.5% year-on-year. And if developers begin fire-selling unsold stock under Victoria's new vacant residential land tax pressure, independent analysts warn that prices across every inner-city building could fall a further 20 to 30% as a new price floor gets set. And here is the detail that puts a government stamp on the severity of the crisis. The Reserve Bank of Australia's April 2025 Financial Stability Review confirmed that Victoria is the only state in the country where mortgage arrears are now above pre-pandemic levels. Every other state has recovered. Victoria alone is sliding backwards. The developer's 2021 investor seminar promised Melbourne apartments offer outstanding capital growth potential, rental yield, and long-term security. But the Reserve Bank of Australia data and the third quarter 2025 sales records confirm Victoria is the only state in Australia where mortgage stress is above pre-pandemic levels, and nearly half of central business district apartment sales are at a loss. And finally, the structural issue that runs beneath every single problem we have discussed today. Issue number 6, the regulator that failed everybody. Every single one of the catastrophes we have discussed today, the combustible cladding, the never-fit-for-purpose buildings, the mold-ridden structural columns, the balconies at risk of collapse, all of them required a building surveyor or regulator to sign a certificate confirming they were safe and compliant. In October 2024, a formal review of the Victorian Building Authority was released. The findings were extraordinary. The regulator that was responsible for signing off on Melbourne's 500-plus defective towers throughout the critical construction boom years was operating in a way that critics describe as entirely captured by the industry it was supposed to regulate. Private building surveyors were hired and paid by the very developers whose buildings they were certifying. That fundamental conflict of interest was never resolved. More than 300 buildings were inspected through the Cladding Safety Victoria program and found to have over 500 balconies with minor or major defects, raising serious safety concerns for residents. Only 24% of owners with identified defects have had them fully fixed. The most common non-cladding defects found were poor waterproofing in 41% of buildings, defective plumbing in 32%, and broken lifts in 28%. This is not the result of bad luck. This is the result of a decade of pro-developer, light-touch regulation at the precise moment the city was building at the greatest density in its history. And the people who paid the price for that political decision are the ordinary Australians who bought those apartments in good faith. The building certificate promised. This building has been inspected and certified as compliant with all relevant Australian building codes and safety standards. But the subsequent engineering reports have found building after building, load-bearing structures without footings, detached roofs, combustible materials throughout, and waterproofing failures in nearly half of all inspected buildings. Now take a step back and look at the full picture we have just assembled. This is not 6 isolated stories about bad luck or rogue builders. This is one single, catastrophic, systemic failure that runs through every layer of Melbourne's apartment market simultaneously. The regulator that was supposed to ensure buildings were safe was captured by the industry it was certifying. The cladding that was supposed to protect buildings was flammable. The structural materials that were supposed to hold buildings up were incorrectly installed or missing entirely. The strata managers supposed to protect owner funds were pocketing undisclosed insurance commissions. The special levy laws that were supposed to be transparent allow bills of $90,000 to land without warning. The market that was supposed to deliver capital growth is delivering capital losses to nearly half of all central business district sellers. And Victoria is the only state in the country where mortgage stress is rising above pre-pandemic levels. The United Kingdom experienced a strikingly similar crisis after the Grenfell Tower fire in 2017. The British government committed £17 billion to remediation. As of April 2025, only 33% of affected United Kingdom buildings had completed remediation. 8 years, £17 billion, one-third resolved. Melbourne is following the same playbook, step for step, but you do not have to walk into this trap. Now let us talk about what actually makes sense in Melbourne's property market right now. If you are determined to buy in Melbourne and the broader Victorian market, the guiding principle is brutally simple. Avoid the specific structural, financial, and regulatory traps that have destroyed apartment owners. Here is what the data actually supports right now. Option 1. Low-rise apartments in middle-ring suburbs. The data clearly distinguishes between the towers of the inner city, which are showing catastrophic loss rates, and the low-rise boutique apartment buildings of Melbourne's middle-ring suburbs. Properties in suburbs like Reservoir, Preston, Northcote, Brunswick and Footscray, with 2 to 4 story strata complexes built before the 2009 construction boom, are showing fundamentally different performance patterns. They have simpler structures, lower strata complexity, smaller owners' corporations, and far less exposure to the combustible cladding crisis. Owner-occupier demand in these areas is holding values, and the rental competition remains strong. If you are going to buy a Melbourne apartment, this is the category where the risk profile looks manageable. Option 2. Freestanding houses in middle-ring suburbs. While houses have also softened in Melbourne's outer suburbs, the Grattan Institute's November 2025 analysis of Melbourne's 3-story zoning changes noted that well-located, freestanding residential properties in the middle ring retain strong long-term fundamentals. You avoid owners' corporations entirely, meaning no strata fees, no insurance kickbacks, no special levies, no waiting for 30 other owners to agree on a building decision. You control your own property. You know exactly what you own. In a market where hidden liabilities are the defining risk, owning a property where you are the sole decision-maker is an extraordinary form of financial protection. Option 3. A pre-purchase building inspection, including a strata records deep dive. If you are buying any strata property in Melbourne right now, do not rely solely on the standard vendor statement. Hire an independent building inspector specifically experienced with defect identification in multi-story buildings. And separately, hire a strata records analyst to review every minutes of meeting, every engineering report, every insurance renewal, and every correspondence in the owner's corporation's records for the last 5 years. These services cost between $500 and $2,000. They can save you from a $90,000 special levy surprise 6 weeks after settlement. That is the single best due diligence investment available in this market right now. Option 4. Demand a Section 32 Plus, a building defect disclosure report. Victoria currently does not legally require sellers to disclose known building defects in a Section 32 vendor statement. But as a buyer, you can make the contract of sale conditional on the vendor providing a current building engineer's defect report, not just the standard conveyancer's documentation. If the vendor refuses to provide one, treat that refusal as a significant red flag. Any owner who is confident in the structural integrity of their building should have no reason to resist an engineering inspection as a settlement condition. Melbourne's property market told a generation of Australians a very specific and very powerful story. It told them that buying an apartment in the inner city was the smart move, the aspirational move, the financially responsible move for the future. It told them that the building certificate was the proof that everything was right. It told them that Melbourne always grows. But 65% of the buildings those Australians bought contained defects. Nearly half of the buildings repaired under the government's own cladding program were hiding additional structural failures underneath the panels. And today, owners across 500-plus buildings are trapped, cannot sell, cannot hold, and cannot walk away. You do not have to be next. Read every strata document, demand engineering reports, avoid glass towers built between 2009 and 2020 in Melbourne's central business district and inner ring. Talk to owners in the building before you sign. The due diligence system is broken, but you can build your own. If this video opened your eyes to what is genuinely happening inside Melbourne's apartment towers right now, tap the like button so we can put this information in front of every Australian family considering a purchase before it is too late. If you want to stay one step ahead of the property industry, the regulatory failures, and the financial traps that are destroying ordinary Australians who did everything they were told was right, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this story is not over, and we are going to keep following it. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Are you currently trapped in a Melbourne apartment with a defect bill or a pending special levy? Has your building been identified as having combustible cladding? Tell me your story below, because the more this conversation happens in public, the harder it becomes for governments and developers to look the other way.